And that changes everything. Now we know that whatever they built these stone circles for was built before there was a lot of rainfall. So they built this giant energy generating grid out of the stone circles with the magnetrons that kept feeding it extra energy. And then I believe they were possibly geoengineering or making the planet more habitable or something like that, because then the rain came. And
Yeah,
then the rain created rivers and it washed some of the stone circles away. This is an incredible discovery.
we should teach the physics of how rain is attracted. So when capacitance is implosive, for example, a stone circle, it's actually why Tutankhamun's blood was used for rainmaking. And we have a nice web series on the physics, goldenmean.info/rain. We saved some Brazilian villages by making rain as well. And I've been a rainmaker all my life, fragment of Tutankhamun memory, whatever. But the physics is that the vapor gets centripetal enough to have permission to touch, and that's when it forms a droplet. The physics of precipitation, which has the same meaning in magnet, in alchemy and magic as it does in rainmaking. So when you take say a labyrinth of highly piezo material like quartz or a good stone circle, what you make is a bit of implosive capacitance. There's many pictures at goldenmean.info/rain. They classically used the Agnihotra, they used the Sri Yantra, and they changed the rainfall for years at a time. They measured it actually in the Bill Witherspoon work. You see the pictures there at goldenmean.info/rain. So the short term, and this is again the physics of what was later called orgone, which was really a misnomer for implosive capacitance. The point is that the water vapor gets permission to touch, and therefore how the molecules in the vapor form droplets. The physics of actual rainmaking is that centripetal capacitance is what enables the water molecules to become centripetal enough to touch each other. That's, for example, why the right kind of dust will trigger rainmaking as well. It's called cloud seeding. So that ability to make implosive capacitance ultimately was the difference between desert and James DeMeo and the Orgone people and Wilhelm Reich documented that for years. They had the correct diameter tubes in the active water, focusing the microwave for rainmaking. So once you understand the physics of rainmaking, then you can understand very clearly what these stone structures were doing. Simply, the water will not be attracted if the grid doesn't have fractal magnetics. It's very simple. And so it's actually, to take that to a societal and psychological meaning, if you look at James DeMeo's excellent desertification and patriarchy papers, proving how, or not proving how, but proving that patriarchy causes the spread of deserts. So in patriarchy, you have no permission to touch. And with no permission to touch, the water vapor cannot form droplets, actually. Whereas the ancient matriarchal cultures were rainmaking cultures because the people had permission to touch. And that gets to a profound understanding of how fractality is actually charge distribution permitted, whereas patriarchy is the opposite.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
So here's an interesting head scratcher for you, since you've studied Egypt a lot. And now we've already touched upon the cone-shaped tools and the magnetrons, and I mentioned that that bird-headed being with a magnetron watch. But what a lot of people miss is, so he's holding the cone, the pine cone. Then there's a magnetron watch here, but there's another cone going up his arm that points into the magnetron watch. And most people miss that cone that is on the side of his arm. So there's a cone that's pushing energy into the magnetron, and then that magnetron somehow generates some energy that goes through his hand into this cone to shoot out a beam, or whatever. I call it a beam. I call it a Caesar beam because
it's directional longitudinal interferometry would be.
Directional longitudinal interferometry.
Yes, that would be a correct term, actually. And you can measure the effect that will have on water, for example. It becomes profoundly healing. Tony Rodriguez was using a Vogel crystal, but now we have firecrystal.com. But you got a phase conjugate pump wave, which could be your breath, or it could be our piezo. We have a dozen technologies, or plasma. Lots of ways to getting a phase conjugate pump wave, namely Schumann, into a piezo structure like a crystal or a magnetron, which then becomes centripetal implosive. And you see that normal electromagnetic fields are primarily of a transverse up and down component. But when the transverse electromagnetic goes down a vortex cone, the side view is a caduceus, there's what's called translation of vorticity, called making the L, what makes the Elohim, or phase shift, where the transverse inertia is converted at the tip of the squirt gun, named Planck, into a longitudinal EMF, which is what gravity waves are made of. And the only thing that becomes centripetal and therefore healing and negentropic. So the physics you have then in the magnetron, the microwave component, in the pine cone shape, you have a capacitive component, you can have an optical component, you can have a plasma component. It's phase conjugate in all those spectrum. Give you an example. The two frequencies that cause photosynthesis are very narrow color frequencies of purple and an orange, which turn out to be precisely golden ratio times Planck. Proving
what two colors are they?
They're a purple and an orange. There's like fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis, many graphics, all the physics. So we have absolute solid proof photosynthesis only exists because of phase conjugation of Planck. It's absolutely clear. Now, when you extend that a little further, and there's more at the page, you see that actually phase conjugation is the only reason color exists. In fact, why rainbows happen when Tibetans die, they become centripetal. So adding the centripetal force to the environment, which the death of a saint does, you see the rainbows because...
So, Dan, did you realize, are you aware of the fact that when you take a cross-section, because I love botany and all these things, that's I study all this stuff. When you take a cross-section of plants and the stems of plants, they have that absolute, that magnetron shape.
Yes, they do.
So it's absolutely...
The microtubule is a good example. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this cavity focusing the high frequencies, columnating into a longitudinal component, which makes it centripetal and negentropic. Exactly.
So when the botanists are trying to explain to us how the trees and the plants suck up water, 50 meters up there, and they say it's the cohesive forces between the water molecules, it's just like they're just making stuff up. It's just they just don't know. So they make up the best possible story that would sort of they can get away with. But please, let's start teaching the right science from the foundational level, and then it's so much easier for the children to grow up wise and understand everything in nature around us and how it all connects. So on that note,
well, if I'm not interrupted, so I worked for years with the famous Professor Phil Callahan, his book Tuning into Nature, on exactly that. So after he proved that columnating coherent infrared was the only real physics of olfaction, that the hummingbird slams into the window if somebody has bliss because they smell it because it propagated the infrared. Anyway, then he discovered that the same insects navigate by the microwave, columnation, the magnetron, and you could see them navigating by the carvings on the pyramid wall, which were microwave amplifiers that affected not just insect navigation, but human telepathy and the physics of life.
Wow, that's a serious bit of studying.
Microwave amplifiers on the pyramid walls. This is Phil Callan. He was a hero.
Wow.
He's the basis of our physics, peaceuniversity.net, when he proved that where the soil was magnetically permissive, the next village down in the wilderness would be friendly. But if the soil was not magnetically flux permissive, the next village would be headhunters. And so if you restore the magnetic connection between villages, he then proved by measurement, you could predict where war versus peace was going to break out, and measured in Ireland, Yugoslavia, and Israel that the magnetic lines broke, then they had war because village A could not feel village B. So you restore this magnetic symmetry in the grid. That is the ultimate physics of peacemaking, which in physics is defined by the negentropy caused by implosive phase conjugation.
That is something that we should adopt right now in the world. We need that.
PeaceUniversity.net. The physics is all there. The same implosion happens in your brain waves and in your breath and in the land. And when it gets centripetal, that negentropy is named peacemaking.